The 1980s were a neon-colored wonderland. It was a decade when kids chewed bubblegum that looked like cigars, chugged sodas that glowed like lava lamps, and peeled sticky fruit roll-ups from their tongues like edible toys. At the time, it all seemed perfectly normal, but here's the twist. So many of those foods we loved back then are now banned, restricted, or completely vanished from shelves. Why? Because what was once comfort food is now considered dangerous, reckless, or downright illegal. Today, we're counting down 25 foods and childhood habits that were totally normal in the 80s, but would never fly today. Number 1. Trick-or-treating until midnight. Halloween in the 80s was pure freedom. Kids roamed neighborhoods with pillowcases until porch lights flickered out. No parents hovered, no reflective tape, no glow sticks. Just friends, sugar, and the thrill of the night. Nobody checked candy for tampering. Nobody worried about curfews. You ran until your legs gave out, then dumped your haul on the bedroom floor and traded like Wall Street brokers. Today, the thought of kids wandering until midnight unsupervised feels shocking. Back then, it was just another rite of passage. Number 2, waterbeds as a household flex. Not a food, but a cultural icon. Waterbeds promised futuristic comfort, a heated mattress that rocked you to sleep. In practice, they sloshed like bathtubs and leaked at the worst times. Pets hated them. Kids jumped on them and movers cursed them. Still, for a brief moment, owning a waterbed meant you were stylish, daring, and maybe a little reckless. Looking back, it's hard not to laugh, and harder to believe so many homes had them. Number 3. Hostess Chocodiles. Think of Twinkies. Now imagine them dipped in a thick coat of chocolate. That was the Hostess Chocodile, one of the most indulgent snacks of the 80s. Kids traded them at lunch, froze them for secret midnight snacks, and treated them like treasure. But as trans fats and preservatives came under scrutiny, Chocodiles quietly disappeared in many regions. A cleaner version returned years later, but fans swear it never tasted quite the same. For those who grew up with them, Chocodiles weren't just dessert, they were a bite of 80s history. Number 4. Kinder Surprise Eye Eggs. If you grew up outside the US, you probably remember the thrill of cracking open a Kinder Surprise egg. It wasn't just chocolate, it was chocolate wrapped around a secret toy capsule. Kids collected tiny figures, traded them like treasures, and sometimes built whole imaginary worlds with those miniature pieces. But in America, that thrill never made it past customs. Regulators declared them a choking hazard, arguing that kids could bite into the toy by accident. For kids who only heard about them through overseas relatives, Kinder Eggs became mythical, the forbidden fruit of the candy world. Today, safer versions like Kinder Joy exist, but ask anyone who had the originals and they'll tell you, nothing compares to the dangerous excitement of those foil-wrapped mysteries. Number 5. Olestra Chips. In the 80s and 90s, snack companies promised the impossible. Chips that tasted fried and delicious, but without fat. Enter Olestra, a fat substitute that gave us guilt-free indulgence. Bags flew off shelves as Dieters rejoiced at the miracle of eating chips without consequences. But there was a catch. The human body couldn't properly absorb Olestra. That meant cramps, stomach issues, and some very embarrassing side effects. Lawsuits piled up, late-night comedians made endless jokes, and suddenly the miracle snack became the punchline of an era. Today, Olestra chips are remembered less for their taste and more for their consequences. Proof that when food chemistry promises magic, someone usually pays the price. Number 6. Candy cigarettes. At the corner store, tucked next to bubblegum and lollipops, kids of the 80s could buy candy cigarettes. They were little white sticks, sometimes tipped with red to mimic burning embers. Kids strutted around playgrounds pretending to puff smoke, imitating their parents and looking grown-up, health A. Advocates were horrified. They argued that candy cigarettes glamorized smoking, planting the seeds for dangerous habits later in life. By the 1990s, many countries banned them outright, while others stripped them of branding. Looking back, it's shocking to think children were encouraged to smoke sugar sticks. But for a while, it was just another part of childhood. Number 7. Bubblegum Cigars. If candy cigarettes weren't enough, the 1980s also gave us bubblegum cigars. Wrapped in paper and sold in bright colors, they were handed out at birthday parties and even stocked beside real cigars in stores. Kids chewed them proudly, blowing pink bubbles while pretending to be little adults. Once again, the problem was obvious. These sweets blurred the line between play and real smoking. Health groups pushed back, and bubblegum cigars eventually disappeared from most shelves. Today, it feels shocking that anyone thought handing kids a candy cigar was a fun idea, but in the 80s, it was just another novelty treat. Number 8. Fruit roll-ups. Fruit roll-ups were iconic. Sticky sheets of sugary leather kids peeled from plastic and stuck to their tongues to leave behind silly stains. Parents tossed them in lunchboxes thinking they were harmless fun. But those neon reds? They came from red dye number 2, which was later linked to cancer in lab animals. By the mid-80s, the dye was banned in the US, and suddenly that harmless fruity snack turned into a cautionary tale. Later versions used different dyes, but many parents remained suspicious of those bright reds and blues. For 80s kids, though, fruit roll-ups were unforgettable. Part snack, part toy, and, unknowingly, part science experiment. Number 9. Ecto-Cooler High-C Ghostbusters. Drink. In the mid-80s, one drink ruled the lunchroom. High-C's Ecto-Cooler. Bright green plastered with Slimer from Ghostbusters, and sour sweet like liquid candy, it was a badge of playground coolness. Kids traded juice boxes like gold, and nothing felt better than pulling one out of your lunch bag. But that radioactive glow wasn't natural. The color came from artificial dyes that regulators later banned for health reasons. When the dyes disappeared, so did the magic. For kids who grew up with it, Ecto-Cooler wasn't just a drink. It was a glowing piece of pop culture that tasted like childhood itself. Number 10. Shark Bites. Fruit snacks. Few lunchbox snacks created as much excitement as Shark Bites. Each pack had colorful gummy sharks, but the rarest prize was the white great white gummy. Finding one was like winning the candy lottery. Kids hoarded them, traded them like treasure, and tore open packs with the same suspense as baseball cards. The downside? Those gummies were loaded with artificial dyes and corn syrup. As regulations tightened, the fun colors and flavors faded, and Shark Bites lost their magic. For 80s kids, though, they were more than gummies. They were playground currency. Number 11. Crystal Pepsi. Blue Pepsi. When Crystal Pepsi hit shelves, it promised the future. A clear cola that looked nothing like the brown sodas we knew. Around the same time, Pepsi even experimented with electric blue formulas. Commercials played up the shock value. Kids gasped as neon or crystal clear soda poured into glasses. But the novelty couldn't last. Both relied on additives and color stabilizers that later came under fire. Within a few years, they vanished, leaving only memories of a time when soda was less about taste and more about spectacle. Number 12. Pepsi AM. The 80s were all about pushing limits, so Pepsi decided to market a cola for breakfast. Pepsi AM had far more caffeine than the regular version, pitched as a rebellious alternative to coffee. Kids bragged about drinking it in school, ads showed it as the choice of rule breakers, and for a brief moment, soda at breakfast seemed normal. But parents and doctors were horrified. The sugar and caffeine punch sparked backlash, and Pepsi AM fizzled out by the decade's end. Today, the idea of swapping coffee for soda at breakfast feels absurd. But in the 80s, it was marketed as cool. Number 13. Squeeze-It drinks. Plastic bottles of neon liquid. Twist the cap, squeeze, and gulp. Squeeze-Its were playground favorites, partly because of their bright colors and partly because the bottles themselves became trophies. Kids compared colors, saved empties on windowsills, and treated them like currency. The problem was the dyes inside. Studies later linked some of those glowing chemicals to hyperactivity and even cancer risks. Regulators cracked down, the formulas changed, and the fun faded. For kids of the 80s, though, nothing felt cooler than pulling a Squeeze-It from the lunch cooler and squeezing every drop like liquid candy. Number 14. Orbit Soda. Orbit Soda looked less like a drink and more like a science project. Inside the futuristic bottles, brightly colored beads floated like a lava lamp, drifting with every tilt. Kids passed bottles around in awe, some daring each other to swallow the strange little spheres. But regulators weren't impressed. Questions about the safety of the gelling agents, plus the odd texture, doomed Orbit almost as soon as it launched. Today, it's remembered more for its bizarre look than its taste, proof that in the 80s, even soda was treated like an experiment. Number 15. Hubba Bubba Soda. What if your favorite bubblegum came in liquid form? In the 80s, someone thought that was a good idea, and Hubba Bubba Soda was born. Bright pink, overly sweet, and tasting exactly like bubblegum, it was as strange as it sounds. Kids loved the novelty, saved cans as trophies, and bragged about trying it. Parents shook their heads and regulators eventually banned some of the dyes and additives. It didn't last long, but it remains a hilarious symbol of how far companies would go to cash in on fads. Number 16. Planters Cheese Balls. Few snacks screamed junk food louder than Planters Cheese Balls. Bright orange spheres in tall canisters, they left neon dust all over your fingers. Kids devoured them during cartoons, licking their hands clean, while parents rarely questioned what was inside. The original formula, though, was packed with trans fats and artificial additives later banned or restricted. When they vanished in the 2000s, fans begged for their return. A cleaner version came back, but diehards insist the flavor was never the same. For 80s kids, cheese balls were junk food royalty. Number 17. Peanut butter cheese crackers. Bright orange crackers sandwiched with peanut butter. Affordable, filling, and everywhere. They were a lunchbox staple, traded in cafeterias or eaten piece by piece in little rituals only kids understood. But the original recipe relied heavily on trans fats, banned decades later. Today's versions taste different, lighter, and less indulgent. For kids of the 80s, though, tearing into a pack felt like unlocking guaranteed happiness. Number 18. Peanut butter Twinkies. Yes, they existed. Hostess experimented with stuffing Twinkies full of peanut butter cream, and for a while, kids thought it was a dream come true. Some even bragged about having the rare peanut butter version instead of the usual vanilla. But as schools cracked down on peanut products and allergy concerns grew, these Twinkies disappeared. Fans still remember them fondly as richer and more indulgent than the classic. They're a reminder of how much freedom snack companies once had, and how much times have changed. Number 19. Trix Yogurt. Forget healthy breakfast. In the 80s, Trix Yogurt looked more like melted candy in a cup. Neon pink swirled with neon blue or green, it stained tongues for hours and made kids laugh as they compared who had the brightest colors. Parents shrugged it off as yogurt, but really it was sugar and dyes disguised as dairy. Once those dyes were banned or restricted, the fun faded. By the 2000s, Trix Yogurt was discontinued in many places. For 80s kids, though, it was proof that even yogurt could feel like a party. Number 20. Mountain Dew Pitch Black. Before energy drinks were everywhere, Mountain Dew took things to extremes. Pitch Black wasn't just soda, it was a dark purple jolt of grape flavor that looked almost alien under convenience store lights. Kids dared each other to chug cans at sleepovers, bragging about who could handle the sugar rush. But that intense color came from dyes later banned for safety reasons. When the formula changed, fans swore it never tasted the same. For many, cracking open Pitch Black felt like joining a secret club, bold, strange, and unforgettable. Number 21. Fruit Stripe Gum. Unwrapping Fruit Stripe gum was like opening a rainbow. Each stick came striped in wild colors, wrapped in zebra-themed paper, and even came with free tattoos. The flavor hit hard, fruity and sweet, but vanished within minutes, leaving kids chewing on bland rubber. Still, the fun was in those colors. The problem? Those stripes came from dyes later linked to hyperactivity and other risks. Regulations dulled the gum's look, and eventually it faded into nostalgia. For 80s kids, though, Fruit Stripe was candy, art project, and playground brag all in one. Number 22. Lunchables. When Lunchables debuted, they were revolutionary. Neatly packaged trays of crackers, cheese, and meat gave kids the independence to build their own mini-meals. Cafeterias turned into trading floors as kids compared versions and swapped pieces. But the original recipes relied heavily on trans fats, preservatives, and loads of salt. They looked tidy, but the ingredients were far from clean. Regulators eventually forced changes, and today's Lunchables are lighter, but many fans say they'll never taste as indulgent as the originals. Number 23. Crispy M&Ms. In the 80s, M&Ms got a makeover, a puffed rice center that made every bite crunchy. Kids shook bags just to hear the rattle, then snacked on them in classrooms and theaters. But the bright candy shells relied on dyes and preservatives that later faced bans. The reformulated versions returned years later, but longtime fans insist the originals were better. Maybe it was the crunch, maybe it was childhood magic, but those first batches left a lasting mark. Number 24. Shasta Tiki Punch. Cheap, sugary, and neon red, Shasta's Tiki Punch was a staple at cookouts and summer parties. It fizzed with pineapple cherry sweetness so intense it almost hurt your teeth. Parents loved the price, kids loved the rush, and cases vanished at every barbecue. But the wild color came from dyes that regulators later flagged, and some of the sweeteners were linked to health concerns. Shasta still exists, but the lineup is far tamer today. For kids of the 80s, though, Tiki Punch was summer freedom in a can. Number 25, Heinz colored ketchup. Green ketchup, purple ketchup. For a brief, bizarre window, Heinz tried to make condiments fun by turning them into slime-like colors. Kids giggled as they squirted neon blobs on fries, while parents were told it would help picky eaters. It worked for a while, until the novelty wore off and parents realized ketchup didn't need to look like a toy. Add in banned dyes, and the bottles quickly disappeared. Today, it's remembered as one of the strangest food fads ever, proof that the 80s and 90s had no limit on gimmicks. The 1980s weren't just about snacks and sodas. They were about a culture that felt fearless. Kids chewed candy that looked like cigarettes, chugged sodas that glowed like lava lamps, and rode in the backs of pickup trucks without a second thought. Some of these foods vanished because of health risks, some because of lawsuits, and others because society simply grew more cautious. But together, they tell a story. Childhood in the 80s was loud, colorful, and a little reckless. So now the question is, which of these banned foods or wild memories do you secretly miss? And which make you wonder how we survived the 80s at all?